Buying real estate with no money sounds impossible, right? But it's not, because I did it, and in today's video, we're gonna be going over how you can take $0 and hopefully buy your first investment property. Now, to do these methods, you don't need any experience, but you do have to have a little bit of creativity and, of course, want to take action when an opportunity arises. Now, this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, so we're gonna be going over some proven strategies, how you can get financing for these deals, where you can find these deals, the deal analysis and breakdown to make sure you're actually getting a good deal, and so much more. So if you guys are ready to see the blueprint, keep on watching. Hi guys, if you're new here, my name is Tiffany and I got started investing in real estate at only 18 years old, which you can anticipate I did not have a lot of money saved up, so of course I had to get a little creative. Since then, I have bought multiple investment properties using most of the strategies that we're going to be talking about in today's video so that you guys can replicate exactly what I did, except avoiding all the mistakes. Alright, so before we actually get into how to fund your deal, how to find an investment property, and the exit strategies, we have to understand why you want to get into real estate investing in the first place. Now, this may seem redundant, obviously we all want money, but what kind of money and how often do you want it? For example, some people use real estate as a retirement vehicle, so they go in for the appreciation. Other people really enjoy the cash flow, so they're investing for that. Other people want some heavy capital up front, just like that. So depending on your goals and investing in real estate, you're gonna do one of these three things. There's a few more, but we're gonna focus on these three, which is flipping, renting, and house hacking. Now, when it comes to flipping, we do that to get more capital, so we have more leverage when we're going out to buy more investment properties, which can be very helpful depending on what your goals are. Or number two, renting, which is one of my favorites, and I'm gonna include the BRRRR method in this one just because we are going to be renting, refinancing, taking that money back out, but the goal here is to cash flow, even if it's just a couple $100s a month. And lastly, one of my personal favorites, as you guys know, is the house hacking strategy, which requires a little bit of sacrifice. I think house hacking is a great starting point for people who have $0 and they want to buy their first investment property that's going to cash flow. Plus, you can also get a ton of savings by living rent-free. Now, depending on your goals and your strategies for real estate investing, this is also going to influence the type of financing that you can get for your deals. For example, there are some loan programs that are 0% down, 3.5% down, 5% down, and the list just goes on and on. So let's get into the next step. So number one, and one of my personal favorites that I recently used to acquire one of my deals, is a hard money lender. And these are great because you can use them to buy auction properties on sites like auction.com and Hubzu where they're allowed. So if the auction is actually being held in-house at the auction site, typically they allow for financing, but not conventional, so you have to get a hard money lender or pay cash. They're also great if you want to do flips because a lot of these hard money lender programs allow you to actually finance the rehab of the property, so you don't have to take that out of pocket, which makes it great for any flips, any BRRRR deals that you're working on, because all of that is going to be jumbled into one loan and you don't have to worry about taking that out of pocket except the down payment. Now, one of the biggest benefits of using a hard money lender is the fact that they don't actually use you to qualify for the loan, they use the property itself. And that's why they measure the loan amount to the cost of the property, because it's usually not what it's going to be worth after it's fixed up. Now, you do have to typically buy these in an LLC and have all the documentation for it, but since I went through the process, I've realized that it's not as hard as actually having the income to prove that you can buy the property, sending a bunch of bank statements to a loan officer, and all of that mumbo jumbo that comes with a traditional mortgage, but it can be beneficial in some aspects, but we'll get into that in a bit. Now, one of my favorite lenders that actually allows new-time investors to use them is Kiavi.com, which I used to acquire my recent deal that you guys can see in my last video, and they allow up to 95% LTC, which if we look at this math calculation, let's say you have $10,000 to invest, which I know is not $0, but let's be realistic here. It's also not a lot of money to give you $200,000 in leverage, where $10,000 is 5% of the $200,000. And you can also jumbo in the renovation costs. So this is a lot of leverage for you buying your first property as a newbie investor, and the fact that they actually allow that. And then another lender that I've been seeing on the come up is Backflip.com, which I've seen that they allow up to 97% LTV, which is only 3% of a down payment if you look at it that way. Now, some of the downsides of hard money lenders is obviously that the interest rate is going to be extremely high, and a lot of them do interest only payments over a year span, which means that you're only paying the interest and the full balance will be due after a year. But like I said, depending on your goals and your strategies, this is going to be a great option for those flippers, those BRRRR deals, and if you need to buy in auction properties where regular banks just won't touch. Now, number 2, and again, one of my personal favorites, has to be house hacking because of how flexible you can be and the amount of money that you can put down on a project. Now, the most talked about method of house hacking is buying a duplex and living in one side, renting out the other. But of course, you guys know me, I like to think a little bit outside the box and kind of open my horizon to other ideas. So in our example, if you guys know my backstory, we actually ended up buying a single family residence, adding a shed tiny house conversion to it, and this is now our home while we rent out the front house to some tenants, which is not your most common version of house hacking, but you do have to check your zoning and code regulations just to make sure that it's possible. However, I think this is a great alternative to looking at house hacking versus just your common buying a duplex, living in one side, renting out the other. Not that it's bad, it's just a little different. Now, house hacking is one of my favorite methods for my students who are paying rent, but they want to get into real estate investing. So by being able to house hack, they're not only saving on rent, they actually own a property that's going to appreciate over time, plus your tenant pays off your mortgage, so your living expenses are almost $0, which means all of that extra money that you make off of working can be used to buy your next investment property. Not to mention, you could also stack this with the BRRRR method and get some instant equity cash out refi, and now you have all the money that you put as a down payment back out for you to invest. Now, the one that I highly recommend to all of my students is the FHA 3.5% down, because if this is your first property, you actually get a break on the down payment, which again is the 3.5%, and the income that you actually make for the FHA actually qualifies for more house than a conventional would. Or so to speak, you can buy a more expensive house knowing that you make the same amount of money than if you were to buy a conventional. And of course, it's not to mention all of the first-time home buyer programs and grants that are out there where you can actually get the 3.5% waived. This is going to depend a lot on your county, your state, your income, and there's a ton of other factors. So if you guys want to learn more and see if you qualify, make sure you find me down below and send me a quick message and we can get you going. Now, of course, some of the pros that we talked about with house hacking has to be the lowest down payment. And not only that, but also the interest rate is going to be the best because this is your primary residence. And on top of that, depending on the property, you can actually add homestead onto it, which means your taxes are going to be a little bit less than if this were to be just a flat out investment property. So you kind of get savings all around, and I tell my students, please take advantage of this while you can, because as soon as you buy an investment property and it's only an investment property, the bills start to add up. I will say that. And as for the negatives of this strategy, has to be, of course, that you yourself have to qualify for the loan, so it doesn't depend on the property. However, the property does also have to pass inspections, because if the property doesn't pass the inspections, the bank won't release the money, and then you're kind of stuck at square one. However, I will say, in my opinion, the low interest rate and the low down payment definitely outweigh the cons. And last but not least, we have to talk about creative financing, or as some people call it, seller financing. Now, I personally have never used this type of strategy just because it did not align with my goals. However, I'm not going to say never. So how can you find motivated leads that would actually even take seller financing as an option? One of my favorite places to find highly motivated sellers that would be open to seller financing has to be propstream.com, where you can find off-market deals in all sorts of shapes and sizes. But specifically for seller financing, you want to find homeowners that have low equity in the property and a low interest rate, of course, to match that. And I would also look for pre-foreclosure deals where the seller is kind of in a pickle and you can negotiate things out from there. And number 3 is just homeowners in sticky situations. Maybe they can't afford their mortgage anymore, so instead of the bank foreclosing on them and ruining their credit, you guys can negotiate to overtake their payment, whereas they leave in good standing, and now you own a property for their hopefully low interest rate and with a well-negotiated deal. So now that we have the financing for our deal, we have to find out where's the best place to actually find the deal itself. Because as they say, the money you make is made on the buy and not on the sell. Number 1, we already talked about briefly, which is off-market deals, or even on the MLS itself, where you can work with a realtor to find some hidden gems. Or you can do this work yourself on sites such as propstream.com, or you could even make connections with wholesalers that actually find these deals and bring them right to your doorstep. Each one of these has their own pros and cons. However, working with a realtor and a wholesaler is obviously going to have some fees associated with it, whereas if you're doing your own research on propstream.com, you're going to have to commit a lot of time to finding the perfect deal. Number 2, one of my personal favorites is finding hidden gems on Zillow or realtor.com. Again, you can do this work yourself, so you actually get an idea of the market and looking through what has been selling, what the prices have been like, and perhaps even stumble across a really good deal that was listed just a few days ago, so you can snag it up and be the first one to put it in an offer. So regardless of how you're financing or where you're finding your deal, you have to make sure that this deal is actually a good deal. And of course, the math might be a little different whether you're buying it as a flip or as a rental, or whether you're doing the burst strategy or whether you're house hacking. However, you want to make sure that the numbers make sense. And in my personal opinion, I like to have a plan A and a plan B. You want to make sure that the numbers make sense in more than one situation is my recommendation. And specifically for a flip deal, I like to use my flip calculator, where basically we take all of the comps for a property, add in the bedrooms and bathrooms. We want to make sure that it's actually a comparable to our subject property and something that's going to sell within a similar price point. And you want to make sure that these comps were sold in the last 6 months. That way you're getting accurate results based on today's market, which gives us the total value of right about what your property could sell for. Of course, this is going to depend on a lot of other factors, such as the remodel, how large the lot size is, and a few other aspects. But basically, we have the purchase price, the rehab budget, and of course, the total project cost, including holding costs, realtor fees, all that good stuff, which gives us then our resale price and whether or not this deal is actually a good deal. You want to make sure it makes sense before buying it. And of course, having a budget with enough wiggle room and all of these other factors to make sure that you're not going to lose any money on the deal. Now, where can you get accurate results in analyzing your deal? Personally, me, I have a few video tutorials explaining exactly how I do it using all free available resources. I also have my flip calculator, which if you guys want, it's linked down below. And I know that there's a bunch of other calculators online. However, I highly recommend you taking all of the information yourself and listing out a full spreadsheet with all of the renovations, all of the closing costs, because this is all going to vary depending on your county, your state, what kind of taxes you guys have, closing costs, who's paying the closing costs. There's so many variables, and each state is a little different depending on what the norm is. So you want to make sure you factor all of that out and do some hefty research to make sure that you're going to profit on your deal. Step number 5 to the property owner blueprint is to close on your first deal and finally become a real estate investor. Once you've found your deal, gotten the financing for it, opened up your LLC, submitted all the docs, you typically have about 45 days from start to closing. So this is where you can do all of your inspections, surveys, anything that you'll need for the financing, and of course doing some inspections and background research on the property itself if you need so. And personally, if you're doing a flip deal, this is when I would start getting quotes on the rehab itself, budgeting, and planning the timeline for the project. So that way, as soon as you have the keys in hand, you're able to go out and start getting the work done. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and hopefully this gave you a really good blueprint as to how you can get started getting your own investment property. But if you guys are ready to learn more and get some hands-on training, make sure you sign up below, because I'm launching a masterclass where I'm teaching you guys exactly A to Z, helping you step by step how to get your first investment property, and of course creating a sustainable plan as a real estate investor. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.